This is Keys to the Shop, episode 257, a conversation with Morgan Eckroth of MorganDrinksCoffee. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. As always, I am so happy to have you along today, and I would encourage you, if you have not subscribed, to hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And so that'd be awesome if you'd subscribe. And also, if the show has been really helpful to you and you like what we do, it would be really awesome if you'd give us a 5-star review over at iTunes. That way the show can climb up in the rankings a little bit and people can find the show a little bit easier, get this information and these conversations out there more. Thank you so much to those of you who have done that already. And a bit of news also that Keys to the Shop has been nominated for a Sprudgie Award. The 12th annual Sprudgies by Sprudge.com is a best of competition in many different categories like best producer, best packaging, best coffee writing, and there's a best podcast. And Keys to the Shop has been nominated as a finalist in that category among some really great podcasts as well. And so in the show notes, I'll have a link to where you can vote for Keys to the Shop if you so choose. It'd be really awesome. And their link is also in the Instagram account if you need that. And I'm really grateful for those of you who nominated this show. It's really been a fantastic journey last 4 years. So thank you so much for that. Now, Keys to the Shop also, on top of doing this podcast, offers consulting and coaching for you and your business. If you're looking at 2021 and you want to either open a coffee shop and get started on the right path, or you want to level up your operations, Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you over the phone or in person. There's a lot of different facets of what we do to help you create a thriving coffee business. And I would love to talk with you more about that. If you're interested, just give me an email. We can schedule a phone call to discuss what's going on in your world and how Keys to the Shop might be able to help. Just email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee supplies you with awesome specialty coffee equipment, grinders, brewers, espresso machines, even things like under-counter refrigeration. Purchasing equipment can be a pretty scary thing, especially when you're on a budget and you want to make sure that you're getting the right equipment for the job. So Prima Coffee kind of marries the best equipment with their service in helping you get the right equipment for your circumstance. That's why I love working with them, because they're dedicated to making sure you're successful with specialty coffee. So when you go to this website, prima-coffee.com/keys, you can get 5% off your order at checkout by using the code KEYS5. That's 5% off your entire order when you go to prima-coffee.com/keys and use the code KEYS5 at checkout. And if you're in the market for commercial equipment, I really do think you should reach out to Prima Coffee. They have a long history of doing amazing work for people just like you. Go visit them again over at prima-coffee.com/keys. Now, today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. The Barista Series is a world leader in plant-based performance beverages. Pacific offers oat, soy, rice, coconut, almond, and hemp. And when they launch these things, you'll know that it will perform on bar because they've designed them for the specialty coffee barista, and they've had them tested by some of the world's best baristas before you can even buy them. So you know it's going to stand up to the heat from steaming, produce awesome texture for latte art, and keep the flavor balance focused on the coffee. Your customers that love plant-based options are going to love the Barista Series, and I would encourage you, get this in your store and try it for yourself. Go visit them at their website, pacificfoodservice.com. I definitely think if you're going to offer your customers the best plant-based specialty coffee experience, then you should be serving the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, today we are going to be talking with none other than Morgan Eckroth of MorganDrinksCoffee. Morgan is a barista and content creator, having worked in the specialty coffee industry for 3.5 years now. And in that time, on top of being an awesome professional barista and also a barista competitor, Morgan has amassed 5 million followers across her platforms on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, where she shares her love of coffee through comedic customer service sketches, vlogs about her job, and educational videos. Morgan also just released a line of coffee in collaboration with Wrecking Ball Coffee. And throughout all of our work, it's based on linking baristas and their customers through a shared love of coffee and humor. And it's really been fascinating to watch her journey as her platforms have amassed this following. And I wanted to talk with Morgan about this, but also what is behind this connection. I think a lot of our conversation focuses not just on marketing, but on connecting with the consumer and really finding a message that resonates with the public. And this, I think, is kind of a master class for those of us who want to fully embrace the inevitable digitization of the marketplace and reach out to our consumers through our platforms, whether that's on TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram, or wherever. The remote access that we have to our customers can either be used well or not very well. And Morgan has done such a fantastic job, and having her degree in marketing and also being a hugely successful content creator in the coffee space, she has a lot to share about her own personal journey creating these platforms, and also how we as business owners and operators and as an industry and truly do a great job in providing hospitality and connection to the two audiences that we serve. We serve the people in the shop and we serve the people who interact with our brands online. And that is exactly the kind of balance that Morgan has struck, as she is a professional barista serving people in a shop, and then also representing specialty coffee to a very large global audience. And the kind of experience and insights that she has here is going to be hugely helpful to all of us. So without any more from me, I'm excited to present this conversation to you with the creator of MorganDrinksCoffee, Morgan Eckroth. Well, Morgan, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Waiting for winter to officially get here in Kentucky. It's hard in a southern state to see it happen.
Fair enough. We usually are pretty rainy over here in Oregon, but we've had a pretty calm winter so far, which I am not complaining about in the slightest.
No, not at all. So, we were chatting before recording and talking about how it's been a very interesting ride for you so far. I would love to know kind of like how you discovered coffee. How did you get into the world of professional coffee to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a family that doesn't drink coffee at all. I wasn't around it, wasn't exposed to it until I believe I was 16. I think I was just entering my junior or senior year in high school. And in the small town I lived in, we had our first, kind of true third wave specialty coffee shop open up. I don't really know how I ended up there, but one day I ended up swinging by and I went in, totally didn't know how to order or what to order. But I was like, this is a really cool shop, really beautiful. I was kind of in awe of all the baristas. And it was somewhere that just kind of instantly clicked with me. And so I kind of started exploring the menu and all of that stuff. And it ended up kind of being my home away from home for the rest of high school. I got to know the baristas super well. I started to kind of understand what coffee was, what the different drinks were, and started to really, really respect the people that I was around in that shop. I didn't have any dreams of being a barista at that time, but as I entered college, it was one of the places that I was like, I would love to work here. Like, if anything, it was just the people. I was like, I really look up to these people and I'd love to, pass this experience on to others. Of course, I was at that point, zero experience in coffee, like, could only work part-time. So they were like, no, come back later. And I was like, that's all right. I'll just keep applying. So I think I applied there probably 3 or 4 times. I just kind of kept dropping off my resume. And then finally one day, the owner of the shop, who ended up being a really dear friend of mine, later on, she called me back and she was like, do you want to interview? And I was like, yes. And after that, I started working there. Loved it. It was one of those jobs that just instantly clicked. I always described it as I kind of felt like a superhero in my job. It was something I loved doing. I loved showing up for. And it was a shop where both of the owners had been past barista competitors. So it was something that had been introduced to me pretty early on, was the fact that there's this kind of other world of coffee where, people compete. There's a whole worldwide aspect to it. And I was like, that's really cool. It's something I'm interested in. So I started out exploring throwdowns first, of course, and then had the opportunity to represent my cafe in the United States Barista Championship, which I was incredibly grateful for that opportunity. I had a huge amount of support behind me from the company I worked for, and it was fantastic. It was a super meaningful time in my life. And after that, I was like, this is something I want to do. That kind of having that experience really cemented that coffee was something that I was super passionate about and wanted to, continue diving into as I moved into the later stages of college and, jumping into my career.
And so in college, you're already thinking this is something that's just a part of me. This is what I'm doing, and it seems like you already kind of had that in high school because you had this fascination for what was going on. You had this attraction to it, like it was already a part of you, but just you didn't know exactly how it was going to be a part of your life, but it was meant to be almost.
That's what it kind of felt like. It was one of those things where when I was in the later stages of college, when I was kind of being like, all right, what do I want to do, with this degree? Even then I was like, well, coffee is such a huge part of my life. And it was hard to imagine it not being there.
Yeah. So this pursuit of coffee is so far just. I'm hearing the good parts. I'm hearing a lot about the competition and just the fascination and being like a superhero. But I'm sure that there's challenges that came along with this as you started to get into service and get into just learning coffee. I mean, what were some of the early hurdles that you had as a coffee professional just starting out that you really needed to get over in order to reach new levels of fulfillment in your career as a barista?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest things I kind of struggle with, and it is kind of a thread that goes throughout my life, whether that's talking about, online content, just being a barista, being a coffee professional, any of those things, is kind of that whole imposter syndrome where it's like I constantly question, like, am I good enough to be doing these things, or am I qualified to be speaking about these things, or all of that. And it's something that is like, as a barista, when you get, talked down to by customers, which, happens from time to time, it's customer service, it's front facing, it's all of those things. Sometimes that can kind of be invalidating in a way where I'm like, oh shoot, I'm like, I don't know if I'm like, am I actually a coffee professional? Am I actually all these things I like to think I am? And it also ties into content where, you get comments, you get whatever, where people have a different opinion or something they want to say that might not be the most positive. And it, kind of will strike me as being like, do I have a place here? Am I, qualified to speak on these things? And that's one of the things very early on, just even in my barista career, that I had to kind of find my own, inner confidence of being like, yes, I'm supposed to be here. I have knowledge that's valuable and all of those things. And that was one of the toughest things, at least very early on, to kind of come to terms with.
I mean, practically speaking, how did you do that? Because in one sense, I think that we all have to work it out on our own. But then there's also a community, I'm sure, that is able to kind of help validate our position in the industry and maybe even challenge us where maybe we have some imposter syndrome because we need to be working on an area that we need to get more skill in or more confidence in. Like, what steps did you take practically to kind of overcome that early on?
Honestly, the thing that helped me most was kind of diving into the coffee space, especially online. Very early on, I started following a ton of different baristas and, coffee-based accounts, specifically on Instagram. And being able to understand that other baristas and other coffee professionals are experiencing the same things that I am, are having the same doubts and concerns and worries that I am, was super helpful and validating. Someone who was especially helpful for me very early on was Umeko Motoyoshi. They were extremely forward online with kind of the struggles they went through in coffee, their opinions about coffee, and how they experience it. And being able to, read their writings online, being able to follow their journey through coffee, was something that I really resonated with and made me feel like, yes, like I am experiencing these things, but it's totally normal. The way I'm tasting coffee is normal and all of these things. So just having that kind of like online support system and online community was incredibly helpful in building my own confidence as a barista.
That's a win for vulnerability, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of, content creation, in the face of this imposter syndrome and
Mhm.
getting your feet underneath you as a professional, at what point did this start? I mean, when did it become like a serious pursuit?
Yeah, so I have always, I like to think of myself as a pretty creative person. Even when I was younger, photography was a really big thing for me. And that's what I thought I wanted to do full time initially. I was like, originally, when I was thinking about what degree I wanted, I was like, oh, maybe I'll do photography. I ended up in marketing, but photography was still kind of my main thing. And I actually worked at my very first job for quite a while at the coffee shop as social media manager as well. So I tied all of that in and I had a really good time doing that. I never thought of putting myself in front of the camera per se. That was never something that I really, thought would be possible. And I didn't even start out with content creation wanting to make it a big thing. I started off on TikTok initially. That's where I gained kind of my first and at this point my majority of my audience. And it was just literally, I was like, oh, this is a fun new social media platform. And it was just once, it was summer of 2019 that I was like, I'm just going to post on here. Like, why not? It'll be fun. It'll, we'll just see what happens. And I ended up getting really, really, really good traction with some of the barista content I was making. Um, and I was like, okay, this is kind of fun. It's cool that people are seeing this. I'll just post more. And again, I wasn't taking it very seriously. It was very much kind of a hobby, creative outlet, whatever. And it wasn't until probably even about 6 to 9 months ago that I was like, this is something I either need to tackle full on and take very seriously, or I just kind of need to let go because it was growing too big to just be a hobby
Uh,
of sorts anymore.
Interesting. So now I'm struck by the way that you started it, because you started it with no pursuit seriously of making it a professional outlet.
Mhm.
And it strikes me that maybe that was sort of helping you have the confidence, because maybe if you had thought, okay, I'm going to launch this I've got these plans, I've got phases in
Mhm.
this plan, and it's going to be a big thing. It might have been a nerve wracking experience, and it could have cost you some of the confidence that gained you the following.
I totally agree. I think that's what really helped me initially is because I mean, obviously, I put a lot of care into what I created, and I was serious in the sense that I was putting out stuff that I was proud of, that I wanted other people to see, and that I was comfortable with them seeing. But at the same time, it was like my attitude was always, this is for fun, so it doesn't really matter what happens to it because as long as I'm having a good time and other people are enjoying it, that's all I really care about. And that definitely helped initially because I was able to just kind of mess around online. And just put out kind of whatever I wanted, which ended up resonating with a lot of people.
To what do you attribute the traction? I mean, what is it in terms of resonating messages or content that
Mhm.
you've found really tick the box for people that made them really want to keep coming back and consuming that content?
Yeah, so I'll address TikTok specifically with this one. And as much as I want to say it was all kind of like due to how much, time or thought or care or whatever I was putting into content, I do think a very, very big majority of it was being at the right place at the right time. I started making content on TikTok again in early summer of 2019. So at that point, TikTok was less than a year old. It was super young. It was just starting to kind of gain traction in the mainstream. And there wasn't a ton of baristas on there doing, customer service, educational coffee content. There were a couple, but no one had really like dialed in on that one zone. And also specifically at that point, TikTok, again, as I had mentioned, wasn't really in the mainstream yet. So its core audience and demographics were still quite young, kind of ranging from that 15 to, I want to say like 22 age range. In that age range, there's a lot of people who work in customer service because we're high school, college age, and we're in food service for the most part. And so I think there was this huge group of people that were in customer service that were able to relate to what I was putting out as a barista. And there was also a group of people, I think that have this kind of fascination with the role of being a barista. It's kind of like even how I experienced it when I was younger. It's kind of this, almost like mythical role of the barista who suddenly like pours latte art and all this stuff. So I think there was kind of this cool element of like you get an inside look on this job that some people might idolize. And then also, you get to see how these things actually work and how coffee happens and how latte art happens. And I think it was a combination of all those things that just gave me that traction very, very early on and very quickly.
It's really incredible and also very encouraging too, because that younger generation is going to, have the benefit of that type of content to get them started in the industry in a way that maybe, people just starting out before you didn't have. And so the pressure also to sort of curate the message that you put out
Mm-hmm.
there with your content exists. And I think that's something I want to explore a little bit, because as large of a platform as you have, and I think
Mm-hmm.
officially the largest coffee following on TikTok, it got to be a challenge to cultivate the different facets of your content. So, I mean, how do you approach it now that it's built up to where it is? Like, what are the different parts of the messages and areas that you want to cover? And what's the overarching thing that you really want people to walk away with?
Yeah, so I had to really think about that about 9 months ago. I was kind of faced with the question of like, why am I doing this, and what do I want people to think or feel when they watch my videos? And what I always came back to is I really wanted to share with people the love I have for coffee and how it makes me feel. But more so than that, something I really wanted to break through is that kind of, it's a little outdated at this point, but that stereotype of the pretentious barista. I think that's super toxic. And in my experience, all the coffee professionals and people I know are some of the most kind and loving people. And I wanted to share that with a larger audience, rather than them thinking that baristas are like stuck up, or like you're going to get shamed for ordering coffee one way versus another. That was totally not how I felt. And when I was just working as a barista, that's how I wanted my customers to feel. And so I just tried to treat my online presence the same way. I wanted people to come to my account. I wanted it to be something that was comforting and friendly for them. And I don't, this word like safe space is like, sometimes used in other contexts, but I really wanted it to be somewhere that could be, a homey, like safe spot where they could watch videos and enjoy. And in a way, I kind of wanted to replicate, the experience they would have if they came into if they came into a cafe, coming to my account, if that makes any sense. I want it to be like the coffee shop. You come in and it's warm and it's welcoming, and you have a conversation, you might laugh, and you leave feeling really good about what you just experienced.
Well, that's a really well said, and it folds into your degree in marketing. Honestly, like just the idea of social media, or a coffee shop's digital presence is
Mm-hmm.
the thing that people interact with almost before they interact with the brand itself, and it feels
Mm-hmm.
like drawing that parallel is so wise. Is that something you think you've been successful in? Have people told you that that's the way that they're feeling when they interact with your accounts?
I really hope so. I'm hesitant to make that statement, just because I'm the creator and I don't necessarily know how everyone's interacting with my content. But I will say something that absolutely makes my day and really motivates me to continue making content, is when I hear people say stuff like, "Oh, your videos made me want to go become a barista," or "I watch your videos when I'm stressed out." And that is something that is incredibly meaningful for me. I never realized the impact that my videos could have in that way, because that's how I wanted them to come across. But you never really know how people are seeing them. But again, it's kind of creating that safe, comforting spot where people can feel themselves, where they can feel welcomed, and they can really just enjoy the content rather than having to, put any additional thought into it or to feel attacked or any of those things. So I'm very, very happy when my videos come across that way, but it's always, I never really know.
Right, right. Yeah, you kind of have to have faith, for lack of a better word, that your intention is being reciprocated by
Mm-hmm.
likes and audience growth and things like that.
Yeah.
There's something resonating, and it's connecting with people. It's not just communicating, because
Mm-hmm.
communicating is just putting information out there. It seems like there's a connection out there. We've talked about that on the show a few times, and you're really serving two audiences. In fact, this is part of your story where recently you, as a barista, you took a
Mhm.
break from being a barista, which you had originally intended to be more than a break, but then
Yeah.
you decided to come back to being a barista. And I wonder if you could just talk us through a little bit about what happened in that phase of your professional journey and what kind of realizations brought you back behind the counter.
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated in spring of 2020 with my marketing degree. And of course, at that point, it was very much still in ramping up of the pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty with what my next path would be, because originally, pre-pandemic, I was thinking I'm going to move on to do marketing at a larger coffee company. I very much still wanted to be in that, coffee space with whatever I was doing, even if it wasn't necessarily being on the floor as a barista. However, with the pandemic and with food service and customer service, and a lot of those companies really just taking a massive hit, I had to rethink my plans a little bit. So I ended up jumping out of coffee. I got a position working in social media at a company that was completely non-related to coffee, up in the Vancouver area. And I kind of came to terms with it. I was like, all right, this is using my degree. This is like checking all the boxes except for being in coffee. But I was like, maybe it's time. Maybe this is the door closing on this phase of life. Maybe that's okay. I'll come to terms with it. I'll move on to whatever my next thing is and it'll be totally fine. So I left my job as a barista. I moved up to Portland, and I got married, and I got this new job all at once, which is a lot of changes.
Wow.
It ended up working out, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend anyone take on that many life events at once. But so I started my next position working from home and not doing anything in coffee. And for a while, it was fun. I was learning new skills. I was doing something completely different. It was a fun challenge, which I always really enjoy. Um, but I found myself just dearly, dearly missing my position as a barista, and also missing being able to make the content I used to make. And it was something I really, really struggled with in terms of like my own mental health, my own passions. And I felt like I almost lost myself a little bit, in like what my goals and motivators were, because I had just jumped out of everything I had thought I wanted to do at one point. Um, so I had to do some deep thinking. I had to do some really hard evaluations on what I wanted my content to be and what it could be. But ultimately, I came to the decision that I wanted to pursue content creation very seriously, as kind of a full-time endeavor. And then along with that, I 100% wanted to go back to being a barista. So we actually ended up restructuring Morgan Drinks Coffee to operate more as a business. I had a couple really cool opportunities come up in terms of like releasing my own coffee line. And I also found a cafe up in Portland that I was incredibly excited to work for and that was excited to have me. And it all just kind of fell into place. And actually, last Thursday was my first shift back as a barista, which was absolutely fantastic.
Wow. Well, congratulations are in order for all of those things.
Thank you.
Amazing. Um, that is, you must feel really good about kind of, I don't want to say dodging a bullet, but, career wise, having that experience of dipping out of something that resonates so much with you and then getting back into it. A lot of people spend a long time figuring out that part, and you acted pretty quickly. So kudos to you for sort of pivoting yourself quickly in that way, and not just trying to like hammer out the marketing thing for years and years and years, like make yourself miserable. Life's too short, right?
That was kind of my thought as well. And yeah, I was in an incredibly, privileged position to be able to make that change. But with where Morgan Drinks Coffee was at the time, and some of the opportunities that I had open up, suddenly doing content full time became a very, very viable option. And yeah, I'm very, very happy that I made the change. Even in the last, 2 weeks, it's been a much more joyful 2 weeks, than the past couple of months have been. But yeah, as serious and as fun as my job, in social media marketing was, it was one of those things where I was like, for me personally and emotionally and mentally, I was like, this just isn't sustainable for me. And I'm over here, watching videos of people pouring latte art, being like, ooh, that's what I want to do.
What a day and age where that's kind of an option.
Yeah, for real. It's completely nuts.
So now that you are back now that
Mhm.
you're sort of officially, you've got a business now, Morgan Drinks Coffee, and it strikes me that you've got two audiences. You've got the audience you serve behind the bar every
Mhm.
day in your local community, and then you've got the community online. On a day-to-day basis, I mean, how do you balance those two audiences? What are your thoughts between the two? Are they just kind of like, is it an easy, seamless transition? What kind of a difference is there in the way that you serve those two communities?
Yeah, honestly, I try to treat them the same, if it makes sense. And going back to that idea of creating kind of like the coffee shop experience
Right.
online and wanting people to have that experience. Um, I very much try to present myself, and I like to think it's a very authentic representation of myself. But I want to treat those two groups the same. Another note I'll make is I really do my absolute best not to bring Morgan Drinks Coffee to work with me. That's something that I've always created a very like strict divide between. One of the things when I started this new barista job that I was very firm about is that when I'm behind the bar, when I'm working, when I'm on shift, I'm not Morgan Drinks Coffee. I'm not this like barista that does stuff online. I'm just a barista. I am here clocked on, ready to make meaningful connections, ready to serve people, and ready to be the best barista I can possibly be in this scenario. I don't want to be, the TikTok barista or something while I'm at work. And I don't want to be someone like special either. I'm here to be a barista and to work with this company. And in that way, I think it's really easy for me to still have that very authentic connection with customers, to still, prepare coffee in the best way that I possibly can. And then when I clock off and I go do my Morgan Drinks Coffee, it's kind of the same thing. It's being very authentic online, creating meaningful relationships with followers, and then also just presenting coffee in the most fun and enjoyable way possible.
So it's interesting that you're a barista, and that's really essential to who you are online. But who you are online doesn't seem to be as essential to who you are as a barista.
Yeah.
You don't want the TikTok account and the celebrity that you've achieved, as weird as it might sound to hear
Mhm.
that said, but to impact what you do in the coffee bar. But what is it that you're afraid will happen if you do? Because it works the other way, where the
Yeah.
barista feeds into one, but why not the other way?
Yeah. Well, one thing just on kind of like a core level is when I think about the people I work with, and I think about, I try to put myself in their shoes, and I'm like, all right, if I'm a barista, and then this like internet barista swoops in and like wants to take the limelight, like I don't know, I would feel I would feel very uncomfortable with that. That's not something that would make me feel great about my own skills. And so then when I jump back, into my own brain, that's something I very much take into consideration. Um, I want to be very cognizant about what my presence is, when I'm working, because I am a barista. It's a customer service position. It's a little bit glamorized because we can do latte art and all these like fancy things. But at the same time, I want to just be a barista. I just want to be someone on shift who you interact with, to get your coffee and have a nice conversation with, and you leave feeling good about yourself. I don't want it to be something that's like you're going to a coffee shop to see some sort of like celebrity barista, and then you have all these expectations,
Mm.
about me or about the coffee or about how the shop operates. And something that was also super important to me is that I don't want to be viewed as better than or different than any of my coworkers, because at the end of the day we're all doing the same thing. We're all passionate about coffee. We're all here to give you the best possible experience and the best coffee, and it shouldn't matter who makes your drink or who takes your order or any of those things. So I very much just want to be there to support and uplift my coworkers as the awesome baristas that they are. And I feel like when you start to blur those lines between kind of like the internet barista persona and that whole thing versus who I am when I'm clocked on, then it gets very messy, and it can kind of get a little bit nasty very quickly.
Wow. Yeah. Well said. It's also very impressive that your bosses don't try to leverage that position because a lot of bosses, competition is a prime
Mhm.
example. We've got all of these world or national barista champions working for us,
Mhm.
latte art champions. It's a marketing tool. So that's really rare, I think. Maybe not as rare now, but it seems
Mhm.
rare that the owner wouldn't just kind of use that as leverage to get customers in the door.
Yeah, it's kind of I think it's kind of like a more so like a fun fact. um where if someone asks, because there's been, I mean, even working, I mean, just kind of by default with the quantity of people that follow me. I mean, there are times, during the day when someone's like, "Oh, are you Morgan?" Like that's cool. And it's kind of like it's either kind of like a joke, which I love. I love when it's kind of played off as like, "Oh, haha, she does like stuff online." Like I think that's great. Or it's kind of like a fun fact, like Morgan happens to work here. But I've never really wanted to be used as a marketing tool, just because I do want to keep that, that strict separation between kind of work and then Morgan drinks coffee.
Right. Study marketing, don't be the marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. So, in the market now, so much
Mhm.
of what we are experiencing with COVID and the lockdowns is this sudden push into the digital space.
Mhm.
In our communities that we're connecting with is online. A lot of it by necessity.
Mhm.
The commerce is a lot of e-commerce, and so people are scrambling to do that. And as we go into the digital era more and more, I mean, you've from your experience, been successful with a lot of connection and resonating with
Mhm.
audiences. And I would want to know from you, like, what do you think is critical for brands, for companies to embrace and put into action in order to, both move the needle for their own business and the industry at large? Because that's kind of what we were all after.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of two things. One of them's an idea and one of them's an action. As far as the idea goes, I think the main thing that especially coffee companies need to pursue is creating narrative and creating stories. Too frequently, I see everything is very, very sales focused and it's a sales push. And, they're pretty pictures of latte art. And all of that is great as kind of supplemental marketing materials. But I think there also needs to be that push to be able to create online what the experience is in store. And a lot of that revolves around story, whether it's the story of your regulars, whether it's the stories of your baristas, or whether it's just kind of story of your business. I think a lot of times people and companies especially are afraid of, becoming too person based, or going back to being too vulnerable. But I think that's where a lot of authenticity and connection comes from. And so that's something that I've always pushed for. Back when I was even a social media manager at a coffee shop, was like, all right, what stories can we tell, whether it's who you're interacting with behind the bar as a barista, or who are some of these like amazing regulars you have in the shop, or any of those things. And I think that's incredibly valuable for coffee shops to have intermingled with those very like sales based, traditional marketing tactics. Another thing that I think is incredibly valuable as we move towards the digital age is short form video, which is like kind of obvious, but also it's something
Yeah.
that not a lot of people put the time into. Um, However, with the rise of stuff like Reels and TikTok, it's really clear that the social media space is moving once again back towards video, which is really fun. But again, it's one of those things that can be more time consuming to make. And so a lot of people put it off. But it's super engaging, it's super fun. And as just a pure like customer and consumer of, all things online, it's what I want to see nowadays. A cafe that I think does an amazing job online specifically, is the Arrow that Erica Escalante owns,
Hmm.
and runs up here in Portland. She's done a fantastic job of kind of creating that balance between um, being a person as a business, but then also being a business and having that really, really like amazing story behind her cafe, as well as just having fun online. And I think that's something that makes people feel very comfortable with going into a coffee shop, knowing that it's a place where you can have fun, where it's very personable, where you know a little bit about the people you're going to see when you go in. And I think that's just something that's very, very important, especially for coffee shops. When you start to think about what you're doing online, and also even just breaking through that negative, like pretentious specialty coffee barista sort of stereotype.
Yeah, you're right. We do have some barriers that are inherited. A lot of them are inherited,
Mm-hmm.
and we do have to sort of own those, even though they weren't necessarily ours to begin with in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. But yeah, you're right. Erica is fantastic. She's been a guest a couple times on the show. She's just vulnerability is just the word that keeps coming up, but also
Mm-hmm.
just a tenacity in connection
Yeah.
in relation to what she does with her business, but also this in this digital era, we are we want connection. We want to connect with other people, and at the same time, we have this real need to make money. We have this real need to sell things,
Mm-hmm.
especially now in second wave of lockdowns. And just in my city in Louisville, they can have indoor people at 50% capacity again. Just
Mm-hmm.
today, it's rough. It's rough all over. And so
Yeah.
it's a weird tension to have where you want to be playful, you want to be vulnerable, you want to tell stories, but people are also looking at the back end and saying, well, we also want to sell. So, and what, I mean,
Totally.
how would you tell somebody, hey, you should tell stories and have fun videos, but also uh, assuage some of those feelings of, but we need to pay the bills.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of a balance. And I mean, I would need more time to go over, for individual cases, the numbers of like whether there's direct correlation between the two. But I've always been of the mindset that building that connection, building that trust, and, kind of opening up to that sort of vulnerability goes directly hand in hand with that sort of like, commerce or e-commerce that you're looking for. I think when you start to build meaningful relationships with your followers or your customer base, that will automatically put you in a higher position, in their head when they're thinking about where they're going to spend their money. And so I think it's equally valuable to start to build those relationships online as it is to push sales. And they very much go hand in hand. I don't think building relationships online directly, like, kind of cancels out. I don't think it stops sales. I think it's just another aspect of sales.
Sure. And maybe the fear of it, the vulnerability and the stories and things will cause people to lose those connections and then lose sales. But it seems like the other way around doesn't have as much of that risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so when we hear you talking about this, and I'm just going to maybe channel what some people may be thinking
Mm-hmm.
throughout this conversation, because we've already gone over your stats in the introduction in terms of your followership. I think it's like 4.6, probably more at this point, million followers on TikTok. Um, People be like, boy, I wish I just had half that many. I want that. I want a ton of followers and want to just people want to chase the likes and the
Mm-hmm.
retweets and all the stats. But it seems like there's a quantity versus quality balance here.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how you would advise people to go about if they're inspired by your words about making connections and building these relationships online. How do we pursue it in a way that's not just chasing millions of subscribers, et cetera, and
Mm-hmm.
actually making quality connections along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of like that's the $1 million question. It's that tricky balance by wanting to have, the biggest and the best and the greatest, account or persona or whatever you have, but also still having that highly engaged audience. And as a social media marketer, and with my marketing degree, something that we were always taught is that it's engagement over audience. So it doesn't matter if you have, millions and millions of followers, if you only have a very, very small engaged core group. Whereas you might be a smaller account, let's say with like a couple thousand followers, but you are having meaningful interactions and engagement with every single one of those followers. Like that is so much more powerful. So I would kind of challenge people, if they're looking specifically to grow in the online space, to really kind of dive into their numbers, and start to kind of see how many people are interacting with what I put out, how many people are, leaving unique comments and all of these things. and then really learn to take value from that, because that's so much more important than just like the overarching big number of how many people follow you. I think there's kind of like a natural growth if you can start to notice that you have very authentic, original interactions on your content, that the followers will follow in kind of a weird roundabout way. But starting focusing on engagement and creating relationships is really the more important thing here. Um, Especially for me, originally when I was just starting out, um, I focused very, very closely on interacting with as many followers as possible, publicly, answering DMs, any of those things. And it just kind of builds your authenticity, it builds your credit. And for me, it was super important because, I mean, that's how I'd be as a barista. Like, I'm not just going to ignore you if you ask a question. Like, I'm obviously going to answer it. So I wanted to carry that through to my online space. But tying back to what other people could do, I think it really just is about building connections in the same way that you would in person. I don't think there's no magic way to just gain followers. Of course, you can follow online trends, you can do all these things, but then, for the most part, you're going to kind of look like every other account out there. So finding what you're passionate about, diving into it, and finding other people who are also passionate about that same thing is the best thing you can do. Start to build those authentic, connections with people who care about what you do, and the rest will follow if it's going to follow. And if not, it doesn't. And maybe there's another path you can take.
Yeah, I love it because we are constantly looking at others for an example of how we can grow and what would inspire. You have your own story where you're introduced to the world of coffee via Instagram and following a lot of people that way. And a lot of business owners, and this is not going to change, it's just going to get more prevalent, are going to be introduced to coffee that way in the future. So being able to kind of remember that the metric for success is not the actual number you see. It's not necessarily a blue check or the fact that you can put links in your stories or whatever. It is maybe something a little bit less, digitally impressive, but the ROI in real life is what matters the most.
Yeah, and something I guess I wanted to tack onto that I mentioned at the very end is really like finding the thing that you're passionate about, and really pursuing that rather than trying to replicate what other people have done. Initially when I started on TikTok, back when I was just doing videos kind of for fun, I very much followed, I just was, following the trends. I would just do like videos like everyone else did. And people saw them, but it looked like every other video they'd seen on their feed that day. And it wasn't until I started doing something that was just completely different. And again, because it was different, I had no metric of whether people would like it or not, because I hadn't seen anything like that. So maybe they would see this like weird barista, like pouring lattes and baguettes online and be like, what is this? Like, we hate this. But I had no idea. So I just started doing it. And I think that's really important when people start to think about things like, I want to grow a social media audience, is looking at what hasn't been done yet and then starting to explore that route rather than saying, I'm going to do this because this worked for this other person.
Oh, that's a great point. In so many, maybe there's a lot of memes like 50% Arabica can talk about this, where every coffee shop looks the same, and we tend to just mimic each other so much. We forget who we are. We don't even give ourselves a chance to find out who we are in the space. We just are versions of other people. So that's a really great point. And so we've talked a lot about audiences and growing the brand, and we've talked about your story as well and what's happened in your journey in coffee. But I just wonder, you as a person, we don't separate who we are from what we do, really. We bring that with us to work every day, no matter what we do. So I wonder if you could just tell us, over the years, how have you changed over the course of the last few years? I know there's a lot that's happened, but how has it really changed who you are?
Yeah. So I like to think that I'm the same person as when I started in coffee 4 years ago, but of course that's not true. Like people shift over time. I think initially when I started working as a barista in specialty coffee, I kind of had those rose-colored glasses on of, you know, being a barista is like the coolest thing ever, and coffee is the coolest thing ever, and all coffee shops are amazing, and like, just all those things because I didn't really know any better. But I think over the time being in the space, specifically also being in the online space, you start to see, some of the cracks where you start to tackle issues like equity and sustainability and racial injustice and all of these things that exist within this industry. And that's something that's can be hard to come to terms with, is realizing that this industry that I was looking at with rose colored glasses initially, you know has flaws and has weaknesses and has vulnerabilities, and there are people that are unfairly treated in this industry, and there's all these things that aren't unique to coffee but are very rampant still in the space. And so that's something that I have come to terms with and started very seriously thinking about, especially when I create content, is, am I creating content that is fair to everyone? Am I creating content that is authentic to the industry, both with the flaws and with the good things about it? And that's something that I think has changed a lot in the past couple of years. And it's something that I try to think about anytime I create content that I put into the public space, because I know, for better or for worse, I have a very large audience, and a lot of the audience doesn't work or live in the coffee industry. So they might not know about these issues that I've seen over the past couple of years. And I think it's my job, and kind of my role, is to not, gloss over those things, whether it's, even as basic as the mistreatment of customer service workers, stuff like that.
So when you're pursuing the content now, the view of the industry that you have, the view of you in the industry you had in the beginning is what's reflected in your content. Mm-hmm. And then now it'd be interesting to take, that look in the beginning and say, well, my understanding is reflected in the fact that I chose to do these things or say these things. But now mm-hmm. that I know, X, Y, and Z a little bit deeper, my content has shifted. And it seems like we could easily become trapped in a mode of thinking, no, what worked back then is going to work now, even if my understanding has mm-hmm. changed. So you've kind of adapted based on your own understanding of the industry, and that's just another point of authenticity in your content.
Yeah, that's a really good way to say it.
So when you think about the greater industry, since we're talking about the greater industry, yeah. the industry, quote unquote, what advice would you want to give to baristas and business owners? There's this obvious tension between the two sometimes, and not mm-hmm. so obvious other times. But in terms of building careers and businesses in coffee and having something that's a little bit more sustainable, equitable, and resilient in mm-hmm. the future, like what would you love to see, and what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a huge proponent of, when, let's say you're a coffee shop, you're a business that's just starting, always, always, always put your baristas first. That would be my absolute top recommendation. The shops that I have seen thrive the most, have the most, employee satisfactions, are the ones that are listening to their employees and that are really catering towards what their employees see as, needs or wants. Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, your baristas are the front line. They're the face of your shop, for better or for worse. And having employees that are happy and safe in their jobs and feel empowered is so valuable. And it's just something that, like, I don't know. I think, looking to baristas as experts in their field is also incredibly important. I think there's sometimes an attitude of kind of belittling them, because it's just, oh, you're just a barista. You just pour coffee. And it's a lot more than that. I think especially in all realms of food service and customer service, there are so many skills that come into play, and it truly is a very, very difficult job that requires a ton of knowledge and a ton of training. And so having employers that recognize that empower that, and that can support that is really the key to success nowadays.
So for baristas that are experiencing sort of the similar imposter syndrome, I feel like especially when you're a new barista, it's difficult
Mm-hmm.
not to experience that. And as
Yeah.
you just mentioned, sometimes ownership is not that helpful when it comes to supporting their staff. So I resonate with that message 100%. Speaking to baristas directly,
Mhm.
who may not have the power to necessarily change their outside circumstances,
Yeah.
like how do you advise them to sort of take control of the inner game, so to speak, and be successful in their careers in spite of what's going on around them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would honestly say start looking around in your online community. There's a there's a ton of baristas online and a ton of accounts online specifically geared around coffee education and coffee knowledge, and also support. Some groups that are online that are incredibly, incredibly amazing. Glitter Cat is one. They do amazing work in terms of supporting baristas. Get You Some Gear is also an amazing account that does fantastic work in terms of distributing, coffee gear to baristas. And as we know, it's incredibly expensive, to have your own home setup, to have these
Hmm.
tools that you can then use to better your own craft. And they have a fantastic system. And those are just a few. There's a whole kind of like inside online world of coffee support systems that exists. So if you're not able to find that support system in your immediate physical surroundings or in your workplace, I would highly recommend baristas start looking online, because there's a lot of resources out there that aren't maybe as publicly known, but they do exist, and they're there for a reason, to help support and uplift baristas who might not have that same support in person. So that would be my top recommendation, is just looking into the online community instead of maybe your physical one.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And of course, a great place to start, if you haven't already, is to get in touch with Morgan Drinks Coffee. And, you've got a lot of cool collaborations going on. You mentioned the collaboration with Wrecking Ball, and you got your own coffee line, and that's really awesome. I mean, tell us a little bit more about that, and then how we can get in touch with you and sort of follow you on your different channels.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did recently release a line of coffee, which I'm super happy with. It's in collaboration with Wrecking Ball Coffee Roasters out of San Francisco. I've been friends with Nick and Trish, the two owners, for a bit, and it was super amazing to work with them. We created a blend called the Duet. It's a Guatemala Ethiopia blend. It's kind of an ode to my first experience of coffee, in the sense that it's super comforting. It's a very chocolatey, like chocolate forward coffee, great with cream. We also created a decaf. So those are out for pre-order right now, and they'll be shipping out soon at morgandrinkscoffee.com if you want to check it out. On almost all social media platforms, I'm just Morgan Drinks Coffee, all one word. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And then I am Tiny Latte Girl on Twitter, if you're interested in seeing anything that I say on there.
So we'll link to all that in the show notes for sure. So people be sure to check that out. And I mean, what's next for you, Morgan Drinks Coffee? Now that you're back in the saddle as a barista, you've got the official business. What can we expect to see in the coming year or years?
That is a really good question. I'm kind of in works right now on some new, interesting, like fun merchandising things. So we'll see when and if those come to fruition. But besides that, I'm really focused on just working and honing in my content as much as possible, specifically on YouTube, because that's the channel I'm really working to grow right now. Besides that, you'll find me working as a barista 3 to 4 times every week in Portland, and I will be working on myself to be the best barista possible, and looking forward to any opportunities that come my way in the next, 12 to 24 months.
Well, Morgan, we really appreciate you, the work that you do, and the community that you've developed. It's obviously a huge asset to the industry, and we're excited to see it continue to keep on growing. Thank you for being on the show. It was really great to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was an absolute honor and it was super, super fun.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that the episode was helpful for you and gave you some insight and direction into what you can be doing with your platforms, whether that's in the shop or online. And on all of our platforms, we have an opportunity to connect with our customers through them. So a big thank you to Morgan for joining us on the show. We really appreciate your story and sharing your insights with us. And we can't wait to see what the future holds for you and your business. Now, as was said at the end, if you want to follow Morgan, you can follow her on all of the platforms like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, over at MorganDrinksCoffee. And if you want to pick up that collaboration coffee between Wrecking Ball Coffee and Morgan Drinks Coffee, you can find that over at morgandrinkscoffee.com. And also in the show notes, we've provided a list of recommended accounts, as Morgan mentioned at the end of our episode here, that she would recommend you follow. So look for that in the show notes as well. And if you have any questions or comments, feedback about this episode or any other episode, feel free to give me an email, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's also, again, where you can reach out to me if you're interested in Keys to the Shop consulting. And with that, that is the end of our episode today. I hope that the content here was really helpful for you. And as always, I truly hope that this episode has given you keys to the shop.